as a valuable asset. And so today we're going to be joined by Tim Love, who I'll introduce in a moment, who's an IT systems manager for a really interesting business called Lee Barron Group. Tim's been on a bit of a data journey with Lee Barron, an organization that's been trading for 40 years and has been successful since nobody even knew what data was, let alone captured anything. And we're just going to explore today the journey that he's been on with the business, really, and looking at how they're staying ahead of their competitors through utilizing their data. So let's dive straight in. Tim, say hello.
Hi there, everyone.
How are you today? I can see that as we discussed before we started, Tim is actually in London today, a place that does still exist. You can see that he's donned a suit, so he's definitely in London. That's how it works. Tim, I saw you had a Pret coffee. How was that?
I did. It was remarkably similar to it has been before lockdown. So not much as that hasn't changed. It's just a bit quieter down here. So we are no, it's all in our kitchen's closed in the office. It's all disposable cups and terrible things which are bad for the environment. But yeah, no, everything's still here. The tubes are very quiet. We're just on Regent Street, just off Oxford Circus, and yeah, it's definitely quieter than it was a few weeks ago when I was last in, I think. So it's people are definitely, I think, reverting to staying home a bit more now.
I haven't been to town for ages, but the thing I really want to do next time I'm on the tube is lean over to somebody and say, "You're on mute," and see what happens. They start scrabbling around looking for a button. I just think it's become like a reflex, right? That, "Oh, you're on mute" thing. Anyway, look, thanks for joining us today. I know you've literally just thrown out your old phone system this morning, so your entire business may be suffering as we speak. So thanks to the staff at
Absolutely. I put my phone on silent, so if our telephony has fallen over, then I'll be in trouble in about an hour when we finish. So we'll leave that one for later.
Well, in that case, let's dive straight in. So, look, I'd love to start by just establishing a bit of history about the business, because I'm sure not everybody's heard of Lee Barron. It would be great for everybody to just get a bit more of a feeling for who you guys are and what you do. And then I'd like to dive into some of the topics around data and how you guys really use technology to set out your store, because I think it's quite interesting that even on your website and in some of your public facing material, you really talk about technology as an advantage that you have. Which I don't think a lot of property management firms do, right? So maybe you could just tell us in your own words a little bit about Lee Barron's history and what you guys do as an organization.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, so as you said, we've been around for that's about 40 years. We work in the real estate industry. We're a managing agent. So we manage properties on behalf of our clients. We do the maintenance. We collect the monies from the tenants. We provide customer service to the residents of the buildings. We manage commercial property and shopping centres. We manage some big residential developments. In the property industry. The rental sector, the private rental sector is a big thing now. There's some very, very high class mixed use residential developments going up in London that we're part of managing some of those. And yes, the really exciting stuff. And we've been around for about 40 years, and all that time, we have tried to be innovators in technology back from the days where things like computerized property management systems and document management systems were first coming in. We tried to take advantage before my time, but we tried to take advantage of those as a company, early on, and that's kind of the ethos that's continued to today. And you're right in saying we do like to talk about technology. We put it on our website. We like to put it in our pitches. We think technology, not just data. We're going to talk about technology as a differentiator. It's a crowded market, and it allows us to have an edge over our competitors and provide better service.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, I preaching to the choir here, right? I mean, that's certainly my view, but I think it's really interesting to explore that in a bit more detail. So I think let's talk a bit about legacy. So in a business that's been going for 40 years, obviously there's a lot of legacy there. So what are you dealing with in terms of systems and data? I mean, I'm guessing you don't have the luxury of being a cloud-first business just yet, and you're probably somewhere in the middle of that journey still.
No, I mean, again, yes and no is the answer. I think we are actually, I mean, primarily we are a cloud-first business, and this is again, we have been forward-thinking in the past. To give an example, when everything went to lockdown, we were already on all our tech is hosted on VMware. We run nothing in the office. Yeah, so we have no tin in the office. So whenever we went to lockdown, it was just a case of people logging on from home. Yeah, people logged into the systems from home and continued working as normal. So actually, we had quite a easy transition into the new way of working. So we have been forward thinking. Everything we have is cloud based, and that's been done for a while. Where I think we encountered legacy is with our data, and is with some of our individual systems, which have been in operation for many years and are embedded in the business and have their own quirks and processes, and also have 30 or 40 years of data in them, which obviously you get lots of very historic, uncontrolled, and I'm not going to say bad data because it's not, but yeah, not easy to consolidate and report on, and that kind of thing. So I think I think that's where we suffer is the individual point systems, but we're lucky in that we have thought ahead, and I think we're ahead of some other companies in the industry there, and I think a lot of other companies obviously will be moving to the cloud now, but we were lucky enough to be there beforehand. So
yeah, fantastic. And it sounds like that forward-thinking approach really really served you well during this weird year that we've all been through. Because as you say, no time to react, right? Either you were already in that position or you weren't, and those that were, obviously we were in the same position, frankly, picking up and carrying on from home, other than the kind of cultural impact for our people was pretty straightforward. And so you talk about some of those legacy kind of
yeah. So if we talk divide it into two, we've got data elements. You've got the information on and the information about you might have, where the property is, what the person's name is, what their contact details are, how long they've been in there, if they have any break clauses or rent reviews or lease ends, these kind of event-driven stuff. You then also got the transactional, the transactional kind of data as well. Remember that primarily we do a lot of financial work here with our leaseholders and our residents. So you've got what we've spent on the property, what we've billed the tenants, what we've recovered from them, that kind of thing. So you've got a huge amount of financial stuff, what we manage, who we manage, and then receive what our debtors position or creditors position or the banking, that kind of information.
Right, interesting. Okay, so kind of two clear categories there, and you're kind of on this journey to extract as much value and insight from those data sets as possible. Where do you feel you are on that journey today, and could you give any examples maybe of some wins you've had by starting to look at how you can use that data in a slightly more interactive way, maybe, or to enhance a service for clients, or just a kind of data story really that you might be able to tell from what you've got?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're early to mid journey. I think we're kind of I know we started with you guys a little while back now, and I think that unfortunately, some of the advent of coronavirus has slowed us down on the journey somewhat.
Certainly a distraction, let's say.
So, but we are on the path. I think what we're aiming for is almost like an environment or that kind of. I love using the word data warehouse because it might not be a data warehouse, but we're aiming for an environment where the data is easy for our staff here, not IT, but easy for our staff here to interact with, and our staff to self-serve on, really. And you want to syndicate the ability to look at data out to the business, rather than just being a purview of the IT company, and the IT function. I think that's what we're trying to do. And also, we had the problem, especially with these kind of legacy systems, that the kind of like the kind of like the graphical reporting and the trend and the kind of the trends over time and stuff, you didn't really get that feel from them. So what you end up with is with some very dry spreadsheets or kind of numerical reporting that you can't really, it's very difficult to interpret by how things are going, or which way things are heading. So we've been doing some work around that internally. I think without going into specific, I suppose in the journey, we've been doing some good examples and reports we've done recently. With the advent of coronavirus, people are very interested in what's my performance now as compared to what it was 6 months ago.
Sure.
We were doing a lot of that recently, and looking to get metrics out on that. So we've been running things like our collection performance and statistics and all that kind of stuff, but based on a trend and a comparison. So we're looking at kind of, okay, how's the business performing at a time, kind of a time slot, now until like 3 months ago, and what was that compared to what it was just before Corona hit, and that kind of thing. So I think that we've been doing a bit of that recently, that kind of comparison, and looking at and forecasting as well, and running that forward. So I think especially with the current climate, I'm getting a number of requests about trying to work out where we're going to be, and how the trends that are going on at the moment are going to affect us in the next few months. That's something which is I think people are really keen on at the moment.
Yeah, as you say, I mean, I think right now more than ever, forecasting is invaluable to so many businesses. And actually, when things are uncertain, I think a lot of truth can be found in your historic data. In many ways, that's what happened before, and what can we reasonably infer from that. So that sort of point in time comparison and time series work you sort of mentioned is very, very valuable, and something that we've been doing in our own business and helping.
Yes.
For our audience, how many people have you got?
Yeah, there's about we've got. We employ kind of on-site staff as well, and you could go into the mid-100, probably 30, 40, 50 in the office.
Frame it for people like to talk about a bit more is this idea of democratizing data. One of the things that we often find comes up early in the data conversation is this question of access. I think that traditionally data is held in quite centralized silos, as you say, in the purview of IT, and either basically a technology leader somewhere in the business holds the keys to the castle, and that tends to be quite prohibitive in terms of getting that actionable insight, which is what everybody wants, right? The kind of secret source of what you've got in there is ultimately turning data into action or into insight that you can then advise clients with, make better purchasing decisions with, basically ultimately make your business better in all manner of different ways. And so any wins already from opening up that data a little bit to that sort of the larger team? Is that something that you feel, have you got to that point yet where you're able to?
We haven't. I hate to say it.
Okay.
Now we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We are on the journey, but we're not. We aren't. We are not where we want to be in the future. But as you say, we've got to. We know where that is. I think it's part about the tool set as well. Especially when you've got legacy systems or multiple systems where you've got to aggregate data, or where the reporting functionality is limited. is about providing a system to our staff here where they can do that, because they couldn't do it in our current product. So it's about putting that layer over the systems that is going to provide the ability to do that, which is what we've been working on with you guys. And that takes some time, because obviously we've got to build up, we've got to work out what we want to put in it, what the data structure's like, and all that kind of stuff. So we are on that journey. And democratizing is a great word, actually. I use syndicate. I'm going to syndicate out, but democratizing does sound much better.
More inclusive, isn't it? It's
I'm going to use that one. I got a question for you, actually. I didn't, I know we've had a chat before, Robert, and I didn't, go about it, but I just thought, what are your thoughts about? I'm going to ask you a question. What are your thoughts about
Love it.
in terms of the data we hold? Because as I say, we've got systems that have been around for ages, and it's not only the quality of some of that data, but also it's what data is in there, and some of the data is in there we don't look at anymore, right? So we've got these sources, and some that you see some fields in it or some tables in it, you go, well, actually, do we even use that bit of data anymore? Why are we storing it? And I think that comes on to another question when you're looking at data about having control about what you're collecting, what you store, and what you're using it for. Because I think it's very easy to collect too much data without a clear idea of what you're going to need, and in some ways it's worse having data that you collect that isn't maintained or controlled, that you don't use, because then you just have a load of bad data somewhere that takes overhead and it doesn't do anything for you. And I think you get your companies like your Googles or your Amazons or whatever, who just hoover up any piece of data they can, they can find, because
figure it out later.
They're massive, and they have huge data teams who will, maybe use this for something in future, and it's the kind of thing. But I think for, if we're not one of those guys, you've got to decide, what do you want to be? Are you a company that wants to suck in every single bit of data you can find and store it somewhere, or do you want to be more kind of targeted about what you're actually doing? Because I think it's very easy to get sucked into data for the sake of data, and you store it because it must be good, but not necessarily. It's not. I think you need to be you need to have a clear idea about why you're storing stuff.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. I always enjoy it getting turned around on me. I think because there's this promise that data offers value, organizations are really nervous about disposing of it, right? I think it's kind of gone from people just sort of accumulating data without necessarily realizing they were, to people really deliberately accumulating all the data they can in the hope that one day they'll be able to extract some value from it. And I think the question you ask is really interesting, which is about quality, really. For me, it's about quantity and quality, I guess. So I would always argue, given the low costs associated with storing data now in a cloud-first world, it's relatively cost-effective to store pretty vast quantities of data these days. I think as long as the data is of a high quality, it's worth keeping, even if you're not quite sure why yet, because it's very difficult, or often impossible, to wind the clock back and go and recapture a lot of that stuff. We're generalizing, but typically data, once you dispose of it, is hard to retrieve, right? It's a reasonable assumption to make. So let's take things like user interaction. I think this is an area that a lot of businesses that have any kind of client facing, or even for internal tools, any kind of user interaction with the system, you can go so granular on that. You can track mouse clicks, you can do eye tracking, there's so much you can capture there, which could get really out of hand really quickly. Or you can capture broad strokes, like what's the journey somebody took through a system, right? Maybe you don't care where they were on a page or where their finger was in an app. Maybe actually you just care that they clicked appointment and they booked one, or they didn't, right? And so I think trying to come up with a bit of strategy and taking a step back and thinking about, what are the key things I want to capture? If this data set has 40 fields in it, or 40 available points, maybe actually the things I really care about are these 10, and I'm only going to use 2 of those today. So I think for me, this is where strategy is so important. I think businesses that blunder into data capture without a strategy tend to end up with a load of unusable data in the future. And basically that's because the quality of what they capture isn't good enough. And then the trouble is you've got this massive, data warehouse or whatever it is. You've got this pile of data, and it becomes almost impregnable, right? Like you can't, there's no like line of attack to get any value out of it. And so what happens is it just sort of sits there and decays over time. And I do think I use the word decay very deliberately. I think typically the older data is, the less valuable it tends to become. Again, I'm generalizing, but I think for me, that sweet spot with data is normally the last 12 months, right? It's what's happened over the last 6 to 12 months in an organization. On the whole, that's where the real like gold is for a lot of organizations. So start with the strategy, focus on quality, not quantity. I think making sure that what you do capture is good stuff, it's consistent, it's well thought through, it's those kind of key things that you really care about as a business. And then store it in a way that makes it usable, right? Don't stick it in on some old server under the stairs. Put it on a cloud service that enables you to give access to it to your team. Plug it into tools like Power BI or Google Data Studio, or pick your Tableau. Like choose your poison, but ultimately make it available to your organization. Empower your team with it, and you'll be amazed what they can produce. I mean, we've found on a number of projects this year where data's been the focus. We've started with strategy. We've helped the business figure out like what are the key things you really care about. You gave a few great examples from the Lee Baron perspective. And then what's the quickest way we can put that data in the hands of our team in a way that is safe for the organization, that's going to avoid data leakage and meets all the compliance requirements they might have, but ultimately gives the people who want to ask the questions of that data access to it. Because the other thing we tend to find is when you do the strategy stuff, typically, again, you're working with technology leaders, and they might not really know the questions that someone in the field might want to ask of the data that they hold. And I mean, again, for you guys, I mean, I'm sure you're reasonably knowledgeable on property management, Tim, but it's not your profession, right? And I'm sure there are people in your organization, particularly on the financial side, who have incredibly in-depth and highly skilled knowledge of what they do every day. And frankly, they're going to want to ask questions of your data you probably couldn't even imagine. So giving them access to it in a way that safely allows them to get to that kind of goldmine of quality stuff that you've helped figure out should be stored in the first place seems to be a really important step. And I think this, so to turn it back on you, I think this leads to some interesting trends, because I think something that we've seen is that as everybody's waking up to this idea that data is valuable, people are starting to hold on to it. And actually, there's this kind of insourcing thing happening with data a little bit. I mean, let's take your example. You're dealing with let's say some landowners who maybe have a large portfolio of property across London or across the UK. My instinct is that they're going to increasingly be really interested in keeping that data for themselves as much as giving it to you. Are you starting to see any friction there? What's your experience been of that trend?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely. I mean, you're absolutely correct. You hit the nail on the head, I think, there. Really. I mean, we have had. I mean, we currently run obviously our own in-house systems. We currently dial into 4 client systems at the moment, 2 which have been set up recently. So, and this is where you're absolutely right. Our clients said, well, actually, we don't want you to hold our data. We want to hold our data in house, and you guys can dial into our systems and work on it. And obviously, with the advent and proliferation of cloud computing, that's become possible. Whereas in the past, where where kind of things more on premise, it was more difficult to do. Now it's very easy for clients to take their own data and have us and give us access to it. It's much more available. But you're absolutely right. It does happen. It does. It is more challenging because sometimes these systems are different. They hold different data.
Yeah.
They're operationally different to use. Quite apart from the fact that even if they are the same system, which we're lucky, 2 of the systems we dial into are the same ones one we use, and but even then, it's operationally it splits up your operational processing, because suddenly you've got to do something 3 times instead of once. So there's a data piece to it, in the fact that your data is now spread over multiple products. which may or may not be different. But there's also an operational piece to it, in that now your staff have to do the job, a number of times. It takes them longer. So obviously the data aggregation, of a BI system is quite useful there in terms of bringing that back together on the reporting side. We are also kind of slightly off topic for this, but we are also looking at other systems. It's quite interesting. We're just in the middle of looking at a kind of a purchase to pay kind of accounts payable system, which can also layer over multiple accounting systems as well. So again,
Right.
it brings kind of, one of the things I'm quite keen on here is not just on the reporting side, but on the operational side, it is bringing those things back together into one process. So again, so the staff here, they do things in one place rather than, okay, well, I'm dealing with this client, so now I've got to go and log into X system, Y system, or do it. So yeah, it is challenging. I think it's an interesting thing, and it's definitely the way. It's definitely something we see more and more. And I suspect it's not just our industry here. It's I suspect it's something which is happening across the board.
Yeah, I mean, look, it definitely is, and I think my observation has been it's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction sometimes. It seems like somebody watches a talk like the one we're having now and goes back to their team and goes, oh God, this is like giving away all this valuable stuff, right? We need to start storing this. We need to think about what our strategy is. And then perhaps almost for the sake of it swings to being quite protective.
Yeah, I think that sometimes you look at that bit of it and you don't realize the responsibility. And when it comes down to what about quality and support here and the overhead maintenance of running a system and data, you think about the first, you think about the benefits of having data in house, but sometimes maybe you don't think about actually the responsibilities you have for that as well. I think because there is a responsibility. You are suddenly responsible for that data, the maintenance of the systems it's in, the support of the systems that it's in. You could argue that your agent like us is responsible for the quality of the data, but it is quite interesting. I think right, people sometimes when they are insourcing it, they might not think it through entirely. I think that's the best way to put it.
Very politely put. Yeah, tactically put. No, look, I agree. And that's kind of the message I'm trying to get across as well, is I think, sometimes it can be quite disruptive to relationships. And so, I mean, look, here's a prediction. I'd love your view on this. I think that the future of all this stuff is a kind of rich tapestry of integrated systems, probably through extensive API integration. So I suspect what's going to happen, if you fast forward a little bit, is businesses are all going to start to wake up a bit to how they handle their data. That data is going to be used to feed business intelligence. It's going to be used to feed machine learning, and that kind of data and AI enrichment of what businesses are doing is inevitable, clearly. So it seems to me like people are going to start to come up with this kind of web of integration that allows granular permission to be granted between organizations who work together. And I think that I'd love your view if you think that's realistic in your industry. First of all,
I think, and I think certainly, again, my view is very much, prop tech or property industry focused. But as you say, it's almost certainly the same elsewhere. There isn't really, certainly in our industry, there isn't really one kind of catch-all system that does all the clever stuff we want. There's quite a lot of systems, of point solutions, which are very good out there. And that's actually the journey that we're on at the moment. It's not just on the data side, but we're on a journey of reimagining our tech stack here as well. And that's including various AI products that are available in the prop tech sector and our core systems in the back end here. And part of all of that is integration of data flows. It's massive, and everyone's is what everyone's talking about now. You're absolutely right. And what you end up with is this best of breed tech stack of solutions, and you have them all talking to each other. And that's the journey that we're on at the moment as well. And we're kind of halfway down that at the moment. And I've been very keen on that, in that whatever we put in here, It has to talk to other solutions in the business. We can't have any rekeying, or because as soon as you get rekeying, you lead to, obviously not only is it operationally more difficult, but you lead to data errors, and suddenly you don't have a single source of truth anymore. It becomes an absolute nightmare. So I think internally, you're absolutely right. I think externally with other companies, I think we're starting to see that now. You get there's more and more kind of, I don't know whether you call it big data or whether, however you call it, but there's definitely, we're seeing it more that there are systems where insights and how to put it, insights and the data you're kind of selecting from is driven by what other companies have seen, or the experience of other companies, or brought in from external sources as well. So,
Yeah.
but also, but companies within the industry as well. So actually, you have property companies sharing, you have property companies sharing data. You have property companies sharing data in these systems. You've got these multi-tenanted systems which are in the cloud, and they're used by 50, 100, 150 property companies, and the system can say, well, actually, this other company is doing such and such, or it can aggregate the data, or aggregate the data over, over all of the companies who are using it. So I think we are seeing more of that as well. So I think you're absolutely right. It's all about integration. It's all about the sharing of data, not only internally within the business, but I think between businesses in the industry, and then that's only becoming more and more prevalent. Whereas certainly the latter, 10 years ago, you wouldn't have even considered it. You'd be holding on to your, you'd thought, well, I'm not gonna go into that. It put me at a disadvantage. But yeah, it's certainly becoming more prevalent.
Yeah, great. That's great to hear. I mean, that's I think that sort of anonymized industry-wide comparison can be so valuable. It's almost worth giving up the competitive advantage to share in that benefit sometimes. And I think that's another really interesting trend.
Yeah. I think so. I think people. I think it's more of a general trend, not just in data, but I think this kind of cooperation between companies in the same industry is definitely. I always use it because we're into buildings here and real estate, right? I always use the one I'm using at the moment is 22 Bishopsgate, which is the new office building just at Bishopsgate up in Liverpool Street. And it's quite interesting actually. My wife's company she works for just signed it. She's moving in there, and they've just signed a lease on there just before coronavirus hit. So whoops. But they've got their building has a whole floor. I mean, thousands of square feet. So we're not talking inconsiderable space that they could have let out, to a company. But they've got a whole floor there that is dedicated to collaboration between companies. Essentially they said, come down to this floor, speak with other people in the building, share ideas. And they've got a whole floor in that building that's dedicated purely to do that, which I think is brilliant. And again, you wouldn't have seen that 10, 15 years ago. And I think there's a lot more focus on that kind of idea sharing and collaboration now in not just in data but in business generally. It seems to be the way things are going.
Yeah, I agree, and I think London is particularly in the UK is kind of at the forefront of that. I always remember I went to an event in Vienna about 5 years ago now, and it was an event for business leaders, and it was a UK community that meet every year for a kind of lunch and catch up and speak very openly, right? It's a kind of Chatham House event, and all the leaders of the different businesses meet. It's about 100 people that go, and we all talk about what's going on, warts and all, right? And share insight and frankly collaborate on projects and activities, talk about clients we have in common. It's very open, very, very transparent. And there's this joke about Vienna that I didn't know at the time, which is that when the bombs start falling, go to Vienna and you'll get another 5 years, right? Because it's just like this time warp. It's very strange being there. Like they really are like 5-10 years behind all the major trends. They still read newspapers. They still buy paper newspapers there. Like print is still massive, for example, or at least it was 5 years ago. And it never really occurred to me how true what you're saying is about that collaborative spirit in UK businesses until this day, because we went to this lunch and it was about 70 of the UK community went over and invited about 30 Austrian business leaders to join us for this lunch. And at the end of the lunch, about half the Austrian business owners stood up and walked out, almost in protest. And I had one of the other Austrian guys on my table, and I said to him, like, what's going on? And he said, they just can't comprehend this. They can't imagine sitting opposite their competition having lunch. And it was really interesting because the half that stayed said, this is amazing. We need this. I learned more in an hour than I have in a year about what's going on in this area. I've agreed a partnership with this guy. You know, this amazing woman has a client in common with me. Actually, we can service them better together and all this kind of stuff. So I agree. And I think data, actually, to bring it back to the topic, is one of the ways in which you can unlock that. Because, for example, those systems that we talked about that cover an industry can do things like matchmaking quite safely, actually, if you give them permission to. And I think that, you know, the key to unlocking that kind of collaboration at scale does lie within a lot of these systems and the data that resides within them as well. So yeah, that's a really interesting comment on the Bishopsgate thing. I suppose the direction I'd love to take this now is just to talk a little bit about the future. Like, do you see, you know, 3, 4, 5 years from now, do you think data will be like a department in the organization? Like, people talk about building a data practice and building, you know, we talked about quality. That comes from process and practice, right? And making sure that you have people, frankly, who are responsible for ensuring this stuff is maintained at a certain level. What do you think data? Where do you think data sits in Lee Barron's future?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it's quite good because I was going to mention some of that as well. So that's brilliant. I think the process piece is super important. I do keep if anyone from my company is listening to it on here, they'll know I keep banging on about it. You know, I think you've got to have the process in place, and you've got to have data owners. I think that's one thing, and I think I'll come back to the kind of the data science bit in a second. But I think for a lot of businesses, certainly historically, there hasn't been any or enough ownership of the data. You know, people don't take responsibility for data quality, and so I think firstly it's important that and you know, this isn't a modern thing. This is something which has always been true. You know, it's important that as a business you have the process in place, that the data that goes in your system gets created in a uniform and correct manner that you can report on properly. That's a process piece. Okay. In terms of data ownership, I completely agree. You need to have people in the business who are responsible for the quality of the data. Now, whether you do that by department, you do that in the the accounts team or the property team or however it works, or slightly differently. I mean, that's kind of depending on your business. But you know, we're doing a lot of work here at the moment with exception reporting and data quality, kind of like data health. So we're kind of one of the projects we're working at the moment that is coming into, you know, in the data analysis piece is that kind of exception. So, you know, we can identify key metrics in the data where we expect certain things to be in a certain way, and you know, and we can report those team by team. So we can give them a tracker over time of okay, you know, you guys are responsible for this data. It's 93% correct. It's gone down from last month. You know, we can track on this, and then the business can look at that and say, well, actually, are we going the right way with our data quality or the wrong way with our data quality? So I think that's one thing we're looking at, as well as you know, the best thing is to have it right in the first place. But you know, as we know, that doesn't.
Yeah.
I think the data is interesting. The data science is interesting. I think it's you know, if we were one of the big boys in property, if we were a Cushman's or a JLL or someone like that, we'd have a whole team of data scientists already, right? Because these guys do. You know, you've got X number of people who do, you know, who work on it, and that's do. I think certainly for us as an SMB, I think you know, it tends to form, I think, probably part of the IT function. But you have someone internally who is a data scientist, either whether you employ someone as a data scientist as a specialist role, or whether they do something else and it's part of their role. Yes, I completely agree with you. You know, that is something which is becoming more and more critical for businesses to have. Previously, you know, it's just been IT's done some reports and maybe you can do some yourself or whatever, but actually having that that expertise in house, as you know, as a true data scientist, I think is now becoming much more essential. And it's something that we will, you know, it is something that we will be, we will be looking at. I also think that there's also a bit of an inloading as well. It all comes, I think there's another bit with automation. As tasks become more automated for some of the teams we support as well, what we found is that there's less work required to do automated tasks, but that work is more technical. Yeah, it's all about organizing your data so it works with the automation. So actually, when you introduce automation and you say remove work from a team, because that task the computer can now do it, what you find is that actually to get the computer to do it, you have to organize your data in a certain way, or you have to get your inputs right.
Yeah, the job changes in a way.
Yeah, and actually, the teams who are doing that may not be technically minded, or they may not be data people. So actually what you find is what I found is that you know, either those teams have to become more data literate, so actually you have as well as the data role within IT or whatever, you actually have a data literacy. The business has to be more data literate than it has been before, or you have extra load on a data person within your IT function or your data function or whatever, and that's a product of the automation of tasks.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that, and I think our CTO Simon at Wirelive, his view is that Power BI will be as familiar to frontline workers in businesses as Excel is today in the future. You know, he really thinks that these data tools are going to become so pervasive that it will just simply be a basic skill set that everybody will learn, which I think is really interesting. And I agree with your comment that as things like RPA and some of the trends around automation come in, it changes the nature of the work that needs to be done. It doesn't mean there isn't work to do. It just means, you know, the sort of menial, repetitive tasks can be automated, and actually it frees up humans to do other things. And the hope, of course, is that you find efficiency through that. But it doesn't mean there's no work to do. You know, these systems don't run themselves. They're only as good as their training data and the data that you give them. And that's another thing we haven't even touched on yet, which is a whole other area and kind of perhaps is more a topic for an AI conversation. But machine learning and AI, these trends that everybody hears a lot about, and you know, many watching this may not feel they're expert on, only exist because of data. Without data, these things are useless, right? These systems rely entirely upon the data you give them, and so that's another area where I think collection of quality data becomes so important. You know, we when we do consulting around AI projects, the first question we have to ask people is, well, what data have you got? Because without data, you can't drive these systems to do anything, right? You can't train them to improve. You can't ask them to give you an outcome. You certainly can't create any value from them. And so I think that's another reason why I agree with your view, and I hold it too, which is that data analysts, data scientists are going to live in all organizations. It's going to be partly a sort of robot caretakers, right? To slightly mock the idea, but you know, there's this kind of this janitor role for the automated systems, which will be about making sure that data is well kept and that it's clean and properly stored and all that kind of stuff. But then also refining and managing those automated systems driven by machine learning and making sure that the outcomes they're presenting are the right ones, and the data going into them is without bias and is correct and comes from the right sources. And frankly, you own the rights to it, because a lot of these systems are quite black box once you feed data in. We haven't even talked about compliance. I think that's a whole other fun area that's coming.
Well, you know, we could tie back to our discussion, what data are you storing? You know,
GDPR, we won't go there. But look, Tim, we're kind of close to time. I'd like to just round off with some tips for maybe some sort of actionable tips or guidance for anybody watching. I think there's one I'll pull out that we've already covered, which we sort of glossed over, which I think is really insightful, which is, if you are providing a service that you expect other organizations to buy, it needs to be interoperable. It needs to be open and accessible, and it needs to play nice with all these other systems. You know, what you said in a kind of paraphrased way was, you know, you as the technical leader in the business, if you're making a purchasing decision for any technology for Lee Barron over the next 5 years, you're going to be looking for it to work in an interactive way with the other systems you already have, right? You're going to be looking for those API integrations. You're going to expect it to work with all of your cloud systems natively. So yeah, anyone watching this who is in that field, whether you're on the purchasing side, make sure you're buying those systems in the same way, because it'll bite you if you don't. And equally, if you're building and supplying those sorts of systems to your clients, or on behalf of a client, make sure that you're building them in that way too. Is there anything else, Tim, that stands out for you as like a takeaway tip?
I kind of I think we've covered out. I've just got one more thing to add, actually.
Oh, great, cool.
That's fine. It's just that I think we've talked a lot about where data is going in terms of and the aggregation reporting aspects, the machine learning there, all that kind of stuff. What I would say is that I'm also very keen on customer service here as well, and what gets provided to the customers of the business, and that's in a lot of ways that's how we differentiate ourselves is by providing good customer service. And it's something as simple as imagine how irritating would it be if you called a company up and they had your name wrong. And it really is stuff as simple as that. It's not all, we talked a lot about big data and aggregation reporting and intelligence, but actually, if someone calls you up and you got their details wrong, it's pretty awful. It makes you feel terrible as a customer. So I think there's also the operational aspect to it as well. That's a bit simpler to what we talked about today, but it's very, very key to this business. If your data is bad, then you will not be able to provide good customer service. It's that simple. Yeah,
no, I totally agree. And I think often it's easy to get lost in the complexity of this conversation without remembering the simple stuff. And yeah, look, data, yet again, why is data valuable to a business? Because it allows you to deliver better customer service. Yet another reason why that statement stands up to scrutiny. So yeah, look, are there any other sort of relatively concise tips you would offer anybody? I mean, it sounds like you've found value in thinking about strategy before starting, which I think perhaps is something that's worth taking away. And that's not a veiled sales pitch, because we helped you with it, right? Even if you were doing this yourself in-house, I would recommend to anybody that you think strategy
first.
Yeah, I know it seems obvious, right? It's amazing how few people do it. Anything else that you would say?
I think we've covered everything. I mean, you want to kind of you want to bullet point it. You can say kind of know what data you're storing, own the data you're storing, make it the best it can be, with the quality, and and then that will drive everything else. Because if you don't do that, it doesn't matter what kind of product you put on top of it. You're going to get terrible results out.
Yeah.
The quality thing. The quality thing, I think, is essential. You've got to have, if you don't have quality data, then you're not going to get the right, you're not going to get the right results out whatever you do. So I think data ownership and data quality, is absolutely essential.
Great. I think that's as good a place as any to end. Tim's final word on the matter is focus on quality, and I can't disagree with him. I think that's less is more sometimes. You're definitely better off having a concise data set of high quality, well-structured data than a sprawling mess of crap that you can't get any value out of. Tim, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a really enjoyable morning talking all things data, and nice to see that London is still a place that does exist with humans in it. Although for all I know, you could be anywhere in the world, right? But
not for long. It'll be we're waiting for the other shoe to drop at the moment, aren't we? So so we shall see. But Robert, thank you. It's been really, really helpful, and you've definitely given me a few ideas on this as well. So it's been really useful talking to you.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Tim. Much appreciated once again.
Okay.
And thanks to all of our viewers today. If you're watching live or you're watching back today, we hope you enjoyed today's session. That was Wirelive, I should say, episode 6, talking all things differentiating with data. We'll be back next month for episode 7. You'll find it promoted on all the usual channels, Wirelive on Twitter, Wirelive on LinkedIn, and all of our people spamming it away as well, I'm sure. Thanks again to Tim, our guest this month, and tune in next time. Thanks a lot.